All right, today we are diving deep into a truly fascinating and super detailed interpretation of one of history's most mysterious books, the Book of Revelation. The source we're looking at makes a bold claim that it's not just a prophecy, but a complex code.
So let's start with the big question this author is asking. What if this ancient cryptic text is actually a cipher, a puzzle with a very specific structure? And what if the key to cracking that code has been sitting there, right in plain sight, this whole time? That's what we're going to walk through today.
The entire theory really hinges on one single passage from Revelation chapter 5. In it, the Lamb, who is a symbol for Christ, is said to be worthy of receiving 7 specific things, or essences. Now, the author here argues this list isn't just some nice poetry. No, they claim it's a literal chronological roadmap for the 7 seals.
And here they are: power, riches, wisdom, strength, honor, glory, and praise. The core idea is that each of the 7 seals described in Revelation matches up one by one, in order, with one of these essences. So the theory goes that every time a seal is opened in the prophecy, the Catholic Church on earth actually receives that specific thing. Let's see how this code supposedly plays out in history.
Okay, so the first 4 seals are not interpreted as things that are going to happen in the future. In this view, they're 4 major historical eras that we've already lived through. The author maps them right onto these huge turning points in the history of the Church. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, just how specific these connections are. The first seal, power, is pegged to 312 AD. That's when Emperor Constantine's conversion basically handed imperial power to the Church. Then you have the second seal, riches, linked to the Crusades, which, opened up enormous trade and wealth. The third seal is wisdom, pointing to the Renaissance when all this ancient knowledge just flooded into Europe. And finally, the fourth seal, strength, is said to have started in 1914 with the World Wars, which the author claims began this process of disarming the great powers, creating a different kind of strength.
And this brings us to one of the most, let's say, controversial claims in the source material. The author argues that the writer of this fourth seal, Death, didn't just ride across the battlefields of World War I. They claim this figure is still reigning over the West today, but not through war. Instead, they say it's through the modern medical system. So to really get a handle on the author's main prophecy about what's coming next, we have to learn the lingo. We have to learn the symbolic language being used. You can almost think of it like a prophetic dictionary. First up in our little dictionary is Lebanon. The author says that when you see Lebanon in biblical prophecy, you shouldn't think of the country. Instead, its name, which means white, is actually a code word for the Vatican, which is seen as a white and pure kingdom. And the symbolism just builds on itself from there. So if Lebanon is the Vatican, then what about its most famous feature, those towering, mighty cedars of Lebanon? Well, in this interpretation, the cedars are also a symbol. They represent the popes. And it keeps going. Other important trees that are often mentioned along with the cedars, like cypress and fir trees, are seen as the next level down in the church hierarchy, the cardinals. So you got to remember these symbols. Lebanon is the Vatican, cedars are the popes, and cypress trees are the cardinals. They're absolutely essential for this next part. Okay, so now that we have our symbolic dictionary, we can finally look at the author's #1 prediction. This is what the source says is the very next major event on the prophetic calendar, the opening of the 5th seal. The whole prophecy is built on this one verse from the book of Zechariah. "Open thy doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour thy cedars." Now, let's just apply the little code we just learned. And this is a perfect example of how the author's method works. If Lebanon means the Vatican and the cedars mean the popes, then this verse is interpreted as a direct, literal prophecy. The source claims it foretells the actual, physical burning of the Vatican. So, why would something like that happen? What's the point? Well, according to this framework, this prophesied disaster is what fulfills the purpose of the 5th seal. The martyrdom of the clergy in this fire is what brings that 5th essence from our original list, honor, to the church through their ultimate sacrifice. Okay, so this all leads to a very, very specific prophetic timeline. The author doesn't just predict what they think will happen, but lays out a whole calculated time frame for when these final events are supposed to play out. The whole calculation kicks off with the biblical definition of a generation.
Citing the book of Genesis, the source says a generation isn't just a person's lifetime, but a fixed, specific period of 120 years. So, you've got this 120-year clock. The next question is, when did it start ticking? The author argues that this final generation began with the opening of the fourth seal, which they identify as the start of World War I in 1914. From there, the math is pretty simple. You take 1914, you add 120 years, and that brings you to a very specific end date for our current age. According to this text, that year is 2034. And here it is, the final sequence of events that the author predicts will unfold. It starts with the fifth seal, that burning of the Vatican. That event is said to trigger a countdown of exactly 1,290 days, which leads to something called the abomination of desolation. That's then followed by a final, intense 45-day period called the Great Tribulation, which all comes to a head with the opening of the sixth seal, which ends the whole period. So we've just walked through a really unique and incredibly specific framework for interpreting the end times. The source presents it all as a solved code, right? Mapping seals to essences, symbols to real-world institutions, and prophecies to a hard and fast timeline. It leaves you with a pretty big question, though. What does it really mean to believe that such an ancient, profound mystery has actually been unlocked? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.